Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 8th of December of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And probably we are entering a new period of time, a new phase of the special military operation, and this phase started with the report from Russia that on the 17th of March the Russians are planning to make elections of the president of Russian Federation. Putin have already announced that he is going to take part in the upcoming elections, and he told this piece of news to the Russian hero of the special military operation Zhoga, and the people who try to translate the events language of different actions of different leaders to normal people language told us that that was something like a signal that the Russians were not planning to stop special military operation, that Putin will complete the entire war and something like this. And that's why we understand that this is it's going to be a very difficult and critical period of time for Russia, because Ukraine probably will try to make problems for Russia, and the most important, Ukrainians will make everything they can, but they will not allow the Russians to establish control over Avdiivka and to use this case as the victory case for Vladimir Putin during his election campaign. But if you ask my opinion, I believe that Putin made everything right and correct. He will complete his elections in the beginning of the year. Biden is going to have elections in the end of the next year, so obviously Biden is going to have more problems and Putin will have more time to prepare to ruin the presidential campaign of the current president of the United States of America, Zelensky. But Zelensky made the best. He took a decision not to make any elections at all. Now let's move to the situation on the ground, and we have a lot of very interesting updates. The Russians launched massive missile strikes, which we will discuss in the end of the video, but the most important updates are coming from Krynki, Avdiivka, and of course Robotyne. First, we're going to talk about Kherson direction. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes and activity on this area, the Ukrainians lost 50 soldiers, so the level of losses is not the heaviest one. There were bigger losses from the Ukrainian side, but if you take a look at this map, you see that there are not so many updates and details from this territory, and I analyzed the events that we got today, and I analyzed the events that we got yesterday. If we increase the number of updates since 7th of December, we see significant number of updates in Tyaginka, above the river, in Ivanovka, above the bank of the Ukrainian side of Dnieper River, and so on. So basically, the Russians yesterday tried or made something like artillery preparation. They were attacking and suppressing the Ukrainians who was located in Krynki, trying to pin them down and not to allow them to evacuate soldiers or to get more. The Russians yesterday destroyed very many boats, lots of boats that Ukrainians were using for deployment of forces. And after the Russians managed to make all those things, today the Russians launched their first attacks in direction of Krynki itself. So starting of 8th of December, the Russians start making a reconnaissance operation, reconnaissance in force or in combat, trying to understand whether there are Ukrainian soldiers in Krynki or not. On this scene that was provided us by the Ukrainian soldiers, we can see the Russian forces on the edge of Krynki, let's say on the edge of forest, trying to understand, trying to maybe to call the Ukrainian fire on themselves. The Ukrainians, this video was published by the Ukrainians, as you can see. The Ukrainians start counter-attacking them, and when the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian fire positions, artillery check positions, eye positions, navigated positions, the Russians took a decision to step back, and they basically withdraw this area and return back to the forest. So when we return to the map, the Russians basically was located along this red line. They didn't enter the village themselves. The Ukrainian positions were somewhere in the Krynki to the north of the Russians. The Ukrainians discovered their own positions by attacking the Russian forces, and when the Russians got the necessary information, basically they returned back to the forest. Obviously, the next few hours, maybe right now, the Russians are bombing this territory heavily. They're trying to destroy the discovered Ukrainian positions. Now we are moving to Zaporozhye area, and probably we start receiving very interesting details and updates from Robotyne area. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on Zaporozhye direction, the Ukrainians lost 35 soldiers, and this is the minimal losses from the Ukrainian side. Maybe these losses took place during the previous 24 hours. Today we got a lot of geolocations, and on this video, for example, we see how the Russians bombed the X prison in Malotokmachka. I understand that X prison is a very good place to concentrate forces, to have headquarters, but the attack against the prison is not the main, let's say, video. The most important updates are coming from the line between Robotyne and Novoprokopovka. As you know, during the previous days, the Ukrainians took a decision to redeploy a significant number of forces to Avdiivka area, to Kupiansk direction, and the main forces the Ukrainians took a decision to use from Zaporozhye direction. We know about the 116th Brigade, 47th Brigade, and many other brigades that used to be located in this area, and now they were completely redeployed to Avdiivka or even to Kupiansk. The Russians were expecting this situation. As soon as they realized that there are no more Ukrainians, the Russians launched a series of counterattacks. For example, if you remember, just yesterday we discussed how the Russians managed to capture and to evacuate the Ukrainian Leopard on this line, the line that was captured by the Ukrainians 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago while they were trying to improve their positions on the north of Novoprokopovka. Also yesterday we discussed the Ukrainian FPV drone strike or something like this against the Russian armored vehicles. So basically, I'm trying to say that just according to the yesterday's geolocations, the Russians managed to return control over these 3 lines by with the video of evacuation of Leopard and damaged Russian armored vehicle. And today we continue receiving more updates. First, everything started on the southern area, let's say, of Robotyne, or on the northern area of Novoprokopovka. The Russians, as a result of FPV drone strike, managed to discover first of all and then destroy the Ukrainian position. Maybe this is not the fresh video, but this video was published just today, and after that we got a lot of updates on the southern part of Robotyne. The first video we can see is how the Russians managed to destroy the Ukrainian T-72 or 64 tank on the south of Robotyne, a few armored vehicles, as a result of maybe FPV drone strikes or maybe as a result of anti-tank missile. And after that, during the same video, the Russians published a lot of scenes, a lot of videos from Robotyne area. These destroyed tanks. Then we can see the bombardments of fortifications to the north. The Russians were bombing this territory with FPV drone strikes. Later we got some updates in the same video from Robotyne area, from the village. This is the usage of FA-500 in the village itself. We see the Ukrainian armored vehicles who were heading from the south to the north, so basically they were withdrawing their positions. Then we can see the Ukrainians completely left the village, and so based on this video, it's very difficult to understand whether the Russians managed to achieve some results or not. But later, the Ukrainian sources published another video. On this scenes, we can see the Ukrainian FPV drone who was attacking the Russian stormtroopers on the south of Robotyne. So based on this evidence, based on this video, we can make a conclusion that at least the minimal progress of the Russians as a result of this morning or during the day offensive operation, the Russians managed to reach this line, and this is just about geolocation. So geolocations confirm the Russian progress at least on this area. So the Russians return control over the fortifications, and there are very high chances that the Russians either manage to enter Robotyne itself. So I believe that during the next 24 hours we're going to receive, or maybe tomorrow in the morning of the local time, we're going to receive first updates that the Russians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, managed to enter Robotyne itself, and that there are currently very heavy clashes. And obviously the Ukrainians don't have forces, don't have manpower to protect this territory, and obviously, and based on the video we just saw, the Ukrainians probably will take a decision to withdraw their position further to the north, which will put in risk the Ukrainian forces that currently located on the west of Verbova. Now we are moving further to South Donetsk direction. We have also some updates from this territory. The Russians continue counter-artillery duels using Lancet drones. When talking about the numbers, as a result of clashes on this direction, the Ukrainians lost around 90 soldiers. So the level of losses is on the normal level, like middle position. As you can see, M777 howitzer was destroyed. But if we increase the numbers of this since the beginning of the December, we're going to see complete Russian superiority in the use of Lancet strikes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 artillery systems, or some systems, were destroyed as a result of Lancet strikes just in the near rear behind Ugledar and Novomikhailivka. So the Russians tried to suppress the Ukrainian artillery possibilities, and after that, after the artillery establishing artillery superiority, probably the Russians will make another wave of attack in direction of Novomikhailivka. When talking about Mariinka, we stopped receiving any updates from the western part, which means that probably the Ukrainians took a decision to step back, or this area, the rest of Mariinka and the southern part, is in the gray zone, and the Ukrainians are no longer able to enter this territory. And the main activity we received from the northern part of Mariinka, the Russians published the video how they were bombing this territory with TOS flamethrower systems. So there is no progress for now, but obviously all these bombardments means that soon the Russians will make another attempt to attack from the northern direction, with the purpose to improve their positions and their foothold on the south of Krasnogorovka and on the east of Georgievka. Now we are moving to Avdiivka direction, and we also received lots of updates. As you can see, according to the color, the most updates are coming from the Ukrainian side. And to tell the truth, as we discussed in the previous video just before, the Russians managed to improve their positions along the railways. We haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of that, just the telegram messages and something like this. But I think, and I made a conclusion based on the geolocations, based on the situation in this area, that the Russians took a decision to change their original plan of Avdiivka, a cauldron or offensive operation. For example, on this video we see how the Russian stormtroopers were moving to the stop area, to the final area and the area of Avdiivka railway tracks, but they were discovered by the Ukrainians, and as a result of artillery bombardment, the Russian soldiers were forced to step back and were defeated. But this is not the most important video. So the main idea I'm trying to tell you is that original plan of the Russians when they started Avdiivka news operation was to establish control as a result of very fast and unexpected attack over the villages like Stepovo and Berdichi. That was the original plan from the Russian side, and by taking under control this territory, the Russians would be able to create a fire control and even operational encirclement of Avdiivka. At the same time, the Russians, due to original plan, were planning to attack on the south in direction of Tonenka and Severne, and also to capture these two villages. And as a result of the first original plan, the Russians were planning to establish control of this territory and basically to encircle Avdiivka and to create Bakhmut operation. But something went wrong. It's my conclusion, maybe I'm wrong, but I see this common situation, and the Russians took a decision to change the plan. And now the Russians are planning to attack not in direction of the original directions, but they're trying to attack in direction of Avdiivka from the Terikon direction. So the Russians are moving to the south from Krasnogorovka in this area and in the area of Militseysky Dachi. So this is Militseysky Dachi, and we got proofs of that. On this video we will not open the video file because both these two videos were published by the Ukrainian side. On the first video above this territory there are a lot of Russian soldiers who were killed as a result of FPV drone strikes, so very difficult scenes. So you can watch this video on the map, but it's not during the show. And another video that we can publish is Ukrainian counterattack in this area. As you can see, Ukrainian T-72 tank was moving to the northern part of this residential area, and from a very short distance the Ukrainians were trying to destroy the Russian stronghold and the Russian temporary positions, which confirms the Russian presence in this area. So now let's talk about this plan. This plan is much more easier in comparison of a very big, wide encirclement of Avdiivka for many reasons. First of all, the Russians have already bypassed the main defense belt and they managed to enter the residential area, and currently the storm of Avdiivka has started because the Russians inside of the city from this area. And the main and original plan, new plan of the Russian forces is to establish establish control over this territory. So as a result of storming and clearing operation, to move as far as possible to the south, to force the Ukrainians to step back, and if the Russians are able to take control over this square, they will cut this line, and basically they will create the same cauldron. Yes, there are going to be no cauldron about Avdiivka chemical plant, and the Ukrainians will be able to control this territory and counterattack always the Russians, but there are barriers like railways that will be very difficult for the Ukrainians to cross as well. But the Russians by this attack will be able to split Avdiivka in two parts and basically to collapse the southern Avdiivka. There are going to be some possibilities to support Ukrainian forces using the road between Avdiivka and Severna, and probably the Russians don't have any other option, but they will try to attack in advance from Vadiana to this line, and it will going to be very difficult operation. But the Russians took a decision not to encircle the entire Avdiivka, but at least a half of Avdiivka or the main part in the south or something like this. Because when talking about southern direction, we also got updates that the Russians managed to establish control over this territory, but for now without any geolocated proofs. But let's wait. Obviously we're going to receive some updates. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of clashes on Avdiivka direction, the Ukrainians lost 215 soldiers, and as you can see, the level of loss is very heavy, but the level of losses is not the heaviest in comparison with the other front lines. Now we are moving to Bakhmut Artyomov's direction, where the Russians are storming the Ukrainian positions starting from Mayorsk, Kurdyumovka, Zaryanovka, Andreevka, Klishcheevka, Dachi on the west of Bakhmut, Khromovo, Bogdanovka, Orekhovo-Vasilievka. All this red line is under very heavy fire and very heavy Russian pressure. The Russians are pushing, and we can see the same story as we could see in Robotyne. The Ukrainians took a decision not to give Putin a victory over Avdiivka before the president elections for some reason, and they took a decision to save the city regardless the entire destiny and the entire situation of entire Ukraine. So there are very high chances that the Ukrainians will be able to save and to hold Avdiivka, but basically they will lose entire Ukraine because the Russians are pushing and there are progress on this all over the combat line. When talking about the northern direction, we have the geolocated footage of Russian storming operation along the tree line on the northeastern part of Bogdanovka, which is another confirmation of the Russian progress in this area. We have more proofs from Dacha, from residential area on the southwest of Bakhmut. We have a lot of bombardments, also videos of Russian storming operation. We have final confirmation that the Russians managed to establish control over the hill 215.7, and now the Russians have established visible control over Klishcheevka. We have FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian forces in Andreevka, which also confirms the Russian plans to start the ground operation in this area very soon as well. We have the Russian video of how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions using Kulmur missile along the canal. The Ukrainian, as you can see, fire position. This is a very high-rise building that the Ukrainians were using for maybe targeting or navigating, and that building was damaged by the Russian missile, and obviously another checkpoint, another temporary position of Ukrainian forces was destroyed. So once again, the Ukrainians might save Avdiivka, but they may lose the entire Ukraine. When talking about Sivers direction Liman, according to the Russians, the Ukrainians lost 290 soldiers. So the level of losses of the Ukrainians on these directions are the heaviest. So probably for the second time in a row, yesterday the Ukrainians lost 280, and on Donetsk the Ukrainians lost 175, and today the Ukrainians lost 290, and on Donetsk 215. So this is the second day in a row when the level of losses of the Ukrainians on Tarskoye, on Liman area, is bigger in comparison with Donetsk, which confirms very heavy clashes on this direction, even heavier in comparison with Avdiivka. So something is happening here. We don't have any geolocations from this territory at all. We know about some clashes, about some progress on Solidar direction, but Solidar is more Donetsk front line than Liman. We have some updates from Belogorod, some talks, some rumors, some clashes in Krimina, but no geolocations, and it's very difficult to understand what exactly is happening there. And today some sources reported that probably there is no attack on Liman front line. like we discussed, in direction of Zhiribets River, but this is the area of Ukrainian attack, and that Ukrainians currently are trying to counterattack the Russians in direction of Dibrova. So they're trying to cut the Russians' salient, Tarskoye salient. The Ukrainians are trying to attack in Kuzmina, and this big level of losses from the Ukrainian side is connected with the heaviest losses of offensive side. But also this might be just a speculation, very difficult to understand what exactly is going on there. When talking about Kupiansk direction, the Russians reported that Ukrainian losses were around 100 soldiers. Also, no updates about Ivanovka, Kislovka, Kotlarovka, Sinkovka. So as I understand, during the previous 2 weeks there were very heavy clashes, and now the Russians need some time for regrouping. But anyway, this is going to be very short regrouping, and as I understand, in a day or in a two, the Russians will renew their offensive, and we're going to start receiving more updates from this territory. Also, on the 8th of December of 2023, the Russians renewed their strikes all over the entire Ukraine using X101 and Ha-505 missiles. Those Russians calibers, long-range missiles, and so on. The explosions today took place in Kharkiv. We don't have the footage of the explosion. The attacks took place in Pavlograd, and when talking about this area, we have the first geolocated video, because Zelensky and Ukrainians are trying to reduce the videos from the ground of Russian missile strikes, and I'm not even sure how the Ukrainians managed to publish this video, but this is the results of Russian strikes against Pavlograd using long-range missiles. So we can say that the Russians launched the anti-energy facilities campaign once again. And according to Ukrainian sources, Ukrainians confirmed this piece of news. The Russians used around 19 missiles of these types, like Ha-101 and Ha-555, and the Ukrainians are saying that they managed to shot down 14 missiles of 19s. Obviously, it's up to you to believe or not these updates, but who knows? Who knows? And that's it for this video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.